So yeah, just tell us about yourself. What's been your leadership experience, your story?
Okay. I'm a pastor's kid, so that's always an advantage, as you know. Um, Basically, grew up around ministry, grew up in the church, and went to an Assemblies of God Bible Institute. Uh, my last year of high school, first 2 years of college, graduated, and then became the youth pastor at my dad's church. I did that for 12, almost 13 years. And then that's when we decided to do a church plant in 2013. And so we've been the lead pastors of hold on, we've been the lead pastors of Bible Church for what 4.5 years now, almost 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of sums up my ministry leadership experience.
Yeah. Okay, so can you name a person or experience that's had a tremendous impact on you as a leader and why?
I would say that obviously my dad and my mom have been very, very instrumental. I've learned both good things and bad things, and
Yeah.
so I've learned from both because the good things I've learned to emulate them, and then the bad things, obviously, to find better alternatives or to avoid certain mistakes. Um, from my dad, I learned just how to be a bold and strong leader, how to just have a backbone and not be double minded, and trusting God with your decisions. From my mother, I learned great study habits, and how to lead with a very tender and loving heart, and just always inclined to see people better themselves. So that was obviously very instrumental. Uh, and I've had a couple of other leaders in my life that have also been influential. I remember the first preacher that I heard that kind of used a lot of humor in his message. Really impacted me because I tend to be a storyteller and I try to use humor, and so I just kind of felt like there was a place in ministry for me, and that God could use my gift of storytelling and being somewhat funny and trying to be graceful. And so his name was Ben Pina Jr. Um, Dr. Gary Jones was somebody that I admired a lot, and I remember one particular experience that really impacted my life. We were at one of the district councils where he was elected for the first time the general superintendent of the district. At that time, it was the GLAD district, Gulf Latin American District of the Assemblies of God, and he had been elected. And then we went to eat, and he was sitting at a table like right next to us. So I kind of was eavesdropping on the conversation a little bit. But another pastor comes in and basically says, "Hey, so how does it feel to be the big dog?" That's what he said. How does it feel to be the big dog now? And I'll never forget Dr. Gary Jones' answer. He says, "It feels the same, except that my towel got bigger, and I get to wash more feet now, and I get to serve more people." And man, that was for me like a key moment because uh, his humility, his example, and the words that he said. He was very short, but he said a lot with those few words. I learned from that moment on that the more influence that God gives you, it's just more that He's going to demand from you, and that we're called like Jesus to serve and not be served. And I think that's the main difference between secular leadership versus church leadership. In secular leadership, you're served. In church leadership, you serve others. Kind of rambled a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
So, what are the most important decisions you make and have made as a leader?
Man, I think hands down, the most important decision I've made is the decision to plant a church. It was important on several fronts because number one, it meant letting go of what we knew what was safe for us, of our comfort zone. Got got us out of our comfort zone, got us out of our financial stability. But at the same time, we knew that it was important for establishing long term what we felt God was calling us to do, the vision that God had placed in our hearts. And when I say us, I'm obviously referring to my wife and myself. So I think that was the most important decision. It was one of the most difficult ones, one of the most important ones, and one of the best ones that I can point to.
Yeah, that's good. So how do you communicate vision and values to your people, to your staff, your other leaders in your congregation?
Okay. For me, communicating vision, it depends on the audience, so to speak. Like, for example, for the church in general, I think the best place to communicate leadership values and vision is the pulpit. I believe that, as John Maxwell says, leadership is influence, nothing less, nothing more. And so my place of influence where God has given me the opportunity to lead, or the platform, is, as a pastor. And I believe that the best tool in leadership is obviously God's word. The best values, the best principles of leadership are found in God's word. And so for a church in general, I believe that, and I encourage every pastor to do this, use the pulpit to communicate vision. Because your vision should be aligned, obviously, to God's vision for the church. And I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to church leadership. We see the revival, for example, in the book of Acts. If we just study the church at that time, and we study Paul's letters, it's just full and rich of leadership material and what the church is called to be and called to do. So for the church in general, I do use the pulpit a lot. I try to include elements of vision and leadership in our messages. And then for staff, I have a lot of conversations. We do a lot of conversations. And I was tempted to say meetings, but we have more than meetings. Like, we have our weekly meetings, but we also have lunch almost every day of the week. If I'm in the office, I have lunch with my staff. So we have a lot of conversations, and a lot of them kind of bleed into, obviously, ministry and what we're doing at church. And so that's just a way of opening my heart to them. And that's a way of them not always getting instructions and just directives, but that they can see the heart behind why we do things and how we do things. And so we do that with our staff, our paid staff at church. And then with our volunteers, we have what's become for us a very powerful tool. We call it a vision conference, which is basically a vision cast. We do this yearly, once or twice in the year. And basically what we share there is the church culture that we're trying to create. We believe that if, my firm conviction as a leader is that a lot of brains are better than one, and that I should not try to bypass people's creativity and imaginative skills to create, to lead, to innovate. And so what I do is I just kind of try to communicate a culture and the direction that we're headed in, and then give our volunteers, staff, and leaders freedom to work within the parameters of that vision. And so it gets tense a little bit because there's wiggle room for interpretation. I've made mistakes. Some of them have made mistakes, but we learn from them and we grow. But that's one of the things that I do with our volunteers and leaders is you talk about communicating leadership. I think one of the best ways to affirm the leadership that we establish is to trust them. And in trusting them, do we take certain risks? Yes. In trusting them, do they make some mistakes? Yes. But again, we grow and learn from them.
Yeah, that's good. So what is one characteristic that you believe that every leader should possess?
This one's easy. I think every leader should possess humility. I think this is the difference between, like, the Pharisees and Jesus. The people were surprised by Jesus' style of leadership, and they said it in the Gospels. They said that they were amazed that he taught with authority, not as the Pharisees did. And so, what kind of leadership were the Pharisees and using their power, because being a Pharisee at that time meant that you were, in the upper echelon of education, probably status, obviously. Religion was very intertwined with government, and so that they, the laws the laws were used, against people in many cases. So the Pharisees used their power, used a lot of their power to lead people, and in doing so, they manipulated people in certain situations. They were becoming overbearing and burdensome. And then Jesus comes along, and he doesn't force anybody to follow him. Yeah. He doesn't. He makes it optional. The disciples at one point said, "Hey, there's people leaving us," and Jesus was like, "If you want to leave too, that's okay." And Jesus, I believe, was like, if people are going to follow me, they're going to follow me not because they have to. They're going to follow me because they get a blessing, they get a benefit out of it. And I think that's the difference between authority and power. Power achieves its results through fear. People might follow your lead if you have power because they fear that if you're their boss, that they'll lose their job, that they'll get less hours, that there's consequences. If some pastors lead like this, and there's people in the congregation that fear losing their position or fear being singled out in the congregation or from the pulpit. That's a leadership out of power. But then there's that leadership out of authority. While power gets its results through fear, authority gets its results through love. When you lead with authority, people voluntarily submit to your leadership, believing that it's beneficial, that it's a blessing to them to do so, that you're a man, that you're a woman of God, and that following your lead is going to be a blessing for them. And I think that's the main thing that comes through humility, knowing that, hey, I'm not better than anybody else. The reason why I'm in leadership is because God, called me, and I said yes, and it's by His grace and His mercy. It was nothing out of my own merits. I was saved by the merits of Jesus. I was called by the merits of Jesus. And so I need to stay humble, and keep my ego in check, and be reminded, like I said earlier, that I'm here to serve and not be served. So humility, hands down, for me, is the number one thing leaders need to keep in mind.
Yeah. So, what is the biggest challenge facing leaders today?
Man, one of the things that I see, and these, I would say two things, and they're kind of related. I see people going after immediate results in ministry, and hence there's a lot of burnout in ministry. Again, we whether it's consciously or subconsciously compare church leadership to secular leadership, and in secular leadership, I mean, if you don't get immediate results as the sales manager or as the coach of the football team, you're out. You're out after one season, or you're out after a couple years. And so sometimes we tend to feel that we need to see immediate results in ministry as well. And so a lot of people get burned out. They get frustrated because they went into leadership, church leadership, without patience. And so when you grow impatient, it's easier to get overwhelmed and to get discouraged and to get depressed. When you are a results-oriented leadership as opposed to an obedience-oriented leader, I believe that's one of the main challenges that we see. We hear it on the news and social media all the time. Just people dropping out of ministry, people leaving church ministry for corporate ministry. For corporate leadership, or things like that. And again, I think it's a challenge of the day and age that we live in. We have social media, and we have the viral sensations. People that overnight become famous. Yeah. And I think for the new generation of leadership, that is a challenge. They tend to want to become overnight success stories in ministry as well. But the biblical model is quite the contrary. Everybody in ministry in the Bible that did anything of significance had a process, had a waiting period. Sometimes it was dozens of years, before they got their opportunity. And so I believe that patience, is key. That we gotta avoid burnout by going into church leadership with a mindset of like, look, I'm gonna obey. That's my duty, and I'm gonna leave the results up to God. And I'm not gonna get depressed or discouraged when I don't see immediate
results.
Immediate results.
Yeah. So, going off of that, what is one mistake that you witness leaders making, or a mistake that you yourself have made? Awesome.
Okay. One mistake that I see a lot of leaders making is trusting methods over, discernment, over obedience. We live in the day and age where, and praise God, I'm all for it. I'm all for conferences and church growth seminars and leadership, academies and leadership conferences. Those are great. They're great. But I believe that the temptation that arises there is to go with the cookie cutter method. Like, this works somewhere else, it's going to work for me. But what we lose in that sometimes is that maybe what works somewhere else, that person prayed it down from heaven. They downloaded it in their devotion, and God gave them the direction and the wisdom to be an impact to their community. And some of those things don't always translate the same in every community, in every culture. And so the temptation is to go with cookie cutter methods that everybody's employing, and then leaving out our leaning on God, our just kind of being in tune to His Spirit and to His leading, for the specifics that we need to implement in our specific area of ministry, whether that's the local church or the local community. And so, again, I'd say that's one mistake, that we're going after models, we're going after books and methods, as opposed to being led by the Spirit.
Yeah, that's good. So, what are you doing yourself to ensure that you continue to grow and develop as a leader?
A couple of things. I'm setting myself up for accountability. Like, I'm surrounding myself with people that I love and that love me, and that love me enough to confront me if I need to be confronted.
Yeah.
That love me enough to correct me if I need to be corrected. People that are not afraid of me. That's one thing that I've tried to establish in my style of leadership. Don't try to be intimidating, because when those people need to open up their hearts to you, especially as it pertains to what I'm doing as a leader, then I want them to have the confidence to do that. So I've surrounded myself with a board at church that holds me accountable. And I've also set myself up for mentorship. I have, I would say, at least 6 or 7 mentors that have a prolific resume in ministry, that can help me out, that can pray over me, that can correct me. And so again, those are some of the things that I'm doing.
Yeah. So, what are a few resources that you would recommend to someone looking to gain insight to becoming a better leader?
Okay, a couple of things. There's a couple of things that come to mind. By resources, do you mean like books?
Yeah, you can books. Yeah.
One particular tool that has been very handy for me is there's a leadership curriculum called Giant Leadership, and that's Giant with all caps and little I, and I guess the little I means, again, humility.
Yeah.
There's a specific matrix or a concept that they have that's called the Support Challenge Matrix, which basically puts you into 4 categories of leadership. And the ideal one is the liberator. When you challenge highly and you support highly, you become a liberating leader. And of course, the best liberator is Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely recommend the Giant Leadership Curriculum. They have a couple of books out, the 5 Voices, the 5 Gears, I believe. It's not necessarily like preachy, and it's not religious lingo. It's very leadership kind of corporate type
Yeah.
language, but it's phenomenal for leadership. Uh, Obviously, I believe John Maxwell's Leadership Bible is great. That's been a great tool for me because obviously Maxwell is a leading voice in leadership,
Yeah.
and to have his commentary and his articles in Bible form next to the actual Bible stories where those concepts come from is very enlightening.
Yeah.
And then there's one particular book that comes to mind. I'm the kind of guy that even if I disagree with some stuff in the book, if the other 95% is edifying,
Yeah.
I'll eat it up. And so I love Andy Stanley's Deep and Wide. I believe that the slogan to the book is creating churches that unchurched people love to attend. And I believe that we should try to create atmospheres where people that don't go to church, that don't know the Lord, are attracted to, because that's the commission of the church. And I think that book has a lot of good insight. He speaks of some personal experiences that a lot of us can relate to, and then obviously a lot of leadership principles on creating that type of church.
Yeah. So just to like wrap this up, what advice would you give someone going into leadership position for the first time?
Well, I would say kind of based on what we already spoke about. I would say be bold in action, but be patient. Be patient for results. And when I say be bold in action, I mean, don't be afraid to take risks, but make sure that they're calculated risks. I believe that high risks pay off with high rewards sometimes. But when you take, big risks, you'll also make some mistakes. And the idea is to learn from those mistakes. And that's the good thing about God. He doesn't waste your time. He doesn't waste even your failures. There's always something that you can grow from, that you can learn from. So be bold, but be patient. Again, obedience is our duty, and results, we leave it up to God.
Yeah.
And so a leadership, a phrase comes to mind that I read somewhere. A faith that has not been tested cannot be trusted. I would say the same thing about leadership. If your leadership has not been tested, it cannot be trusted.
Yeah.
And so obviously testing takes time. It's a process. So that's what I would say. Be bold and be patient, and never stop leaning on God. Don't ever think yourself too equipped, or that you have arrived, or don't lean too much on models. Like, make sure that you're always in tune to the leading of the Spirit. One of the things that I have done to kind of set myself up to continue to grow in leadership is to delegate the things that you don't have to do. Delegate them, because I started seeing that as my administrative duties incremented, it ate up into my devotional time. And what has made my ministry, I believe, a success is the time that I've spent with God in His Word, in prayer and study. And so, as the administrative duties, start incrementing, we started delegating a lot of that so as to not eat up into our devotional time, which I believe is the source of our success and our vision.
Okay, so just tell us a little bit about yourself. What's been your leadership experience?
Well, first of all, I'm Pastor Ramiro Izaguirre, and I'm the senior pastor of Gracia, Abundante Church in the city of Conroe, Texas. And it has been a wonderful, wonderful experience being a pastor for the past 23 years. And I truly believe that it has been the greatest experience, only because I just love being a pastor.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. So, can you tell us a person or experience that's had a tremendous impact on you as a leader, and why?
Okay, a personal experience.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna. I just want to tell you that when I first started the ministry, I was asked to be the pastor, the senior pastor of a certain church, let's put it that way, that has passed through a division, and there were only a few families. When I got there were only a few families
Yeah.
left, and my wife and I took that church because we felt that God was calling us to pastor that particular church. So little did I know that it was the most problematic church in the whole district. Little did I know. But believe it or not, that church really had a big impact in my life.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. You want to know?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, just because I know God had a bigger plan. He used that church as an instrument for my ministry. I stayed there in that church for about 5 years, and today I can tell you that God really used that church to shape my ministry, to teach me the different things I was going to need now in my ministry. So that church really blessed me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, as a leader, what are the most important decisions that you have to make and why?
Mhm. Well, I was thinking about that question, and I believe that the most important decision I made in my ministry is to pioneer, to start my own church now.
Yeah.
And because I believe that I obeyed God when He called me to start this ministry, to start Gracia Abundante Church.
Yeah.
And I obeyed Him back when I was the senior pastor in the west of Texas.
Yeah.
And by that time, our church was already a prosperous church, a blessed church. So I was in a really good position back then, and I decided that I was going to obey God. God called me when I was one morning. I was at the church, just doing my ministry at the church, and while I was praying, God asked me to start a new church, and so I did. I really didn't understand at the moment, but I wanted to be obedient, and something happened in my life that I had like I was eager to start something new, and my wife, I shared it with my wife, and she loved that idea, and so we started to talk to the church. We went talked to the church, and at the end we resigned, and then we started Gracia Abundante back on January of the year 2000. And it has been a wonderful experience, a good church to pastor, and we have gone beyond from what I expected. We are very blessed.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, how do you personally communicate vision and values to your congregation, to your people, and to your other leaders in your church?
Well, I communicate vision and values to our church people through series every year. Every year I preach on values, I preach on vision, because vision is very important in order for your church and you to go together. So I always do that during the year through some series. And our leadership, we do that every Monday in our discipleship, specifically to them, and I always teach vision and value to them.
Yeah, that's great. And so, what is one characteristic that you believe that every leader should possess and why?
I agree with so many pastors and leaders around the world that integrity is probably the best and characteristic that every leader should possess.
Yeah. And why do you think Why do you think
because
that?
because if a leader has integrity or a pastor, he will have the trust of his church members
Yeah.
and everybody else's.
Yeah, exactly. So, what's the biggest challenge facing leaders today?
Uh, Biggest challenge in my experience in my ministry, I believe is the biggest challenge is to preach the pure gospel in a changing world, no matter what happens.
Yeah.
And our world is really changing. So we need to preach the pure gospel. And that's what I believe.
Yeah.
Because why? You're asking me why. Nowadays there are so many doctrines and wrong beliefs, and you need to really be serious in your doctrine and in your own convictions.
Yeah. That's good. So, what is one mistake that you have witnessed leaders make, or a mistake that you yourself have made?
Okay. One big mistake we ministers are making is to stop learning and not to educate
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the mistakes I have made in the past.
Mhm. Yeah. And so, going off of that, what are you doing yourself personally to ensure that you continue to grow and develop as a leader?
That's what I was about to tell you.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm enrolled in a ministerial discipleship in this university, and I'm taking classes online. Plus, I read a lot, and I encourage my children to read a lot, because that's very important in order to grow.
Yeah.
If you grow, you need to keep your studies, and you need to keep learning. That's one of the other big mistake that we make, is that we believe sometimes that we know it all,
Yeah.
and that's not true.
Yeah. Exactly.
There are many things to learn. In fact, we can never stop learning.
Yeah.
Right.
That's good. So, just to go off of that, what are a few resources that you would recommend to someone looking to gain more insight into becoming a better leader?
Okay, the first resource that I really recommend is get in the Word of God every day. That's
Yeah.
what that's my experience.
Yeah.
And I mean, in many of my series, and I read books, and I get some series out of those books, but the majority of my series comes from the Bible. I read the Bible every single day, and I listen to the Bible every day. I wake up every morning with my Bible, just listening to the Bible while I'm taking a shower, while I'm getting dressed, and I'm always listening and reading the Bible. And plus, there are a lot of resources online that will really help you, and really they can really bless you. But that all pertains, of course, the books you're going to be reading, they need to pertain to your ministry. For example, if you're doing children ministry, well, you have to find the
Yeah.
books that will bless you in that
Yeah.
area. In my ministry, well, books that really bless me are the books that talk about church and ministry, to the minister to the people, and books that are pertaining to my ministry in particular. So there
Yeah.
are a lot of things in online, so I know that you can find them there.
Yeah. That's good. So, just to kind of wrap this up, what advice would you give someone going into a leadership position for the first time?
You know, I was thinking, Areli, about that, and I'm gonna quote my in Spanish,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I really want you to pay attention, and I will try to explain it a little bit in English what it means. But a really good friend of mine, when I was younger, I was on my 20s, and I was still single, and I was going to go to Oklahoma to start my ministry. I had been invited to be a youth pastor over there, and I didn't know what was going to happen. So I happened to be in this particular church with this particular minister that is now with the Lord, and he has said to me, "Mijo, uh, gánate al indio y quítale la camisa, pero no se la quites antes de que te lo ganes, porque te mata." Ahora te voy a explicar, Areli. Lo que quería decir él era, gánate a la persona. Era un saying, un dicho de aquellos tiempos. Que te ganes al indio quiere decir, gánate al ¿cómo se podría decir aquí? Al Native American Indian back then. Get his confidence. Gánate al indio. In other words, gánatelo y luego tú puedes tomar y puedes exponer y te va a escuchar. No va a haber ningún problema. I'm gonna try to tell you what it means, so that your teacher can understand a little bit what I said. What it means is that your title doesn't automatically give you the right to come in and impose your will on people.
Yeah.
You must first win the heart of the people, then they will follow the vision God has placed in you. In other words, if you go into the ministry, let's say you're gonna pastor your first church, and that's already an established church. What my friend was trying to tell me, don't go there and impose everything. You know what I mean? To impose, to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
No. Go there in a nice way and learn from them, get to know them. And then once you get to know them and they get to know you, once you gain trust, then you can start telling them about your ministry and tell them what to do in the areas of the ministry. So that's what I mean to say with that quote in Spanish. I'm going to say it again. Gánate al indio y quítale la camisa, pero no se la quites antes de que te lo ganes, porque te va a matar. That has been a true. Now it has lots of meaning to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it does really make sense now to me after 25 years of ministry.
Yeah.
It really does. You need to gain the trust of the people. Wherever you go, if you're going to go first to pastor a church or to be an assistant, a pastor, like children's pastor anywhere, or youth pastor, well, you go there, that's good, but it doesn't mean that your title automatically gives you the right to come and impose your will of people. You must first win the heart of the people, then they will follow the vision God has placed in you.
Yeah, that's really good. So yeah, just to start off, can you just tell us about yourself, a little biography?
Yes,
what's been
I
your
began
experience?
ministry. I began ministry in about 1970, so I've been in ministry like over 45 years, beginning with youth ministries, children's ministries, and amazingly, we still find ourselves being called to minister to youth and children. I love that. But I guess I've flourished more in knowledge and in experience through women's ministries and girls' ministries. I'm passionate about missions, and I've been able to, by God's grace, to reach out and minister in 23 countries and 5 continents. I've taught in public schools, private schools, and homeschooled. I homeschooled my children 8 years, and I got my Bachelor of Arts at SAGU to teach my children, and then I've had the opportunity to teach so many more. I'm a musician, a songwriter, and I've had the blessing of recording about 20 CDs through the years. And I've taught in district Bible schools. Recently got my Master of Arts in Bible and Theology right there at Southwestern where you're at. And I've recently enrolled to work on my MDiv, Master of Divinity, which you need before you can get a doctorate. So if the Lord grants me life, I don't mind working on a doctorate. I am 67 years old.
Doesn't look like it.
And I don't feel like it either.
Okay. Wow, that's great. And then also, alongside your husband, you're pastoring a church, right?
Yes, right now we are pastoring a church. We have been here 32 years.
Yeah.
We've been married 45 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really great. So, can you just name a person or experience that's had a tremendous impact on you as a leader, and why?
I would have to say that my husband, because I have watched him day to day. I see his passion, his dedication, consistency in Bible reading. There is not a morning that I have not seen him read his Bible. Selfless devotion. He's not selfish at all. He would give you the shirt off his back, or if you like his Bible or whatever. And I see how it impacts the community and our church. Humility, his caring, his sharing. I'd have to say that I've learned a lot just by living and watching him.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. You guys are a great power couple.
No, well, thank you so much. We love Jesus.
Yeah. Okay, so what are the most important decisions that you have made as a leader, and why?
As a leader, some of the most difficult decisions that have to be made are you have to choose integrity and honesty in a world that cheats and does anything for a buck or for a title or for position. And you may even see this in ministry, and you just have to swallow and smile and know that God is in charge of everything anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing is you need to decide that you can't stay stagnant. You have to improve yourself. You got to get better, whether it's education, ministerial skills. You have to keep it. It's daily. I mean, and it doesn't matter that you've had 20 years in ministry or 30 or leadership. You still need to get better so that you can lead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So how do you personally communicate vision?
Any way I can. You've got to be enthusiastic. You've got to communicate your vision clearly. You've got to have clarity. Don't make it so complicated that nobody feels capable. Little steps at a time produce much more successively or continuously than overwhelming yourself and others. So I would say clarity and being enthusiastic, you will be a communicator of your vision.
Yeah, that's good. So what is one characteristic that you believe that every leader should possess?
The first and foremost would be determination. Other characteristics that you might want to also consider are honesty, excellence, humility, initiative, follow through, and passion. If you don't love what you're doing, get out and do something else, because it'll show. It'll bleed through to those you lead.
Yeah, that's good. So what is the biggest challenge facing leaders today, and why?
I think that the greatest challenge, and this could be different in this day and age than other times, but maintaining your focus on your followers. There's too many distractions. Now with technology, you can spend hours because you're accessible, because you can get everywhere, do anything, and really it's going to take a lot of self-control. So I guess it's just maintaining your focus in a world that you're so accessible to.
Yeah.
And you're accessible and you have access to so much.
Yeah. So going off of that, what is one mistake that you witness leaders making, or that you yourself maybe have made?
Leaders and myself would be the mistake that we make is macro management, trying to do everything ourselves for the sake of getting the job done right. And some of us are perfectionists. Rather than see someone else procrastinate or not do it as well as you do, you don't delegate. So that's one of the greatest mistakes leaders can make. And I've learned through the years that you've got to delegate. But that is one big mistake that I've made and others.
Yeah, definitely. So what has been your most rewarding experience as a leader?
My most rewarding experience has been mentoring and then seeing those that I mentor succeed, excel, and even become my bosses.
Yeah. Yeah. That's always a good feeling.
Yes.
Yeah.
You must have done something right somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So what would you tell your 25-year-old self?
I would tell my 25-year-old self to pace yourself, focus on major issues, relax on the minors, because especially females, we tend to get so uptight about the things that really 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years, they're not going to matter.
Yeah.
And we tend to let those things smash out the majors. So don't let the minors bog you down, and don't overcommit.
Yeah, that's good. So, who in the Bible do you identify yourself with, and why?
I identify with Esther. I've read that book so many times, and every book that can go with it. She was placed by God in the palace for such a time as this, for that very time that he needed her. And I realize and I feel like I am in this world at this very time, and every place that God has strategically placed me, it's been for him for such an hour as this. And I live with that daily, just knowing, God, I'm here for now, because you placed me here. Yeah. And so I identify with her. I identify with the fact that she did face many challenges, and we're going to be faced with challenges. But I pray to God that I can be as courageous as her.
Yeah. So, what do you do? What are you doing to ensure that you continue to grow and develop as a leader?
Study the Bible. First of all, I look at leaders like Nehemiah. Nehemiah is one of my favorite leaders, has a lot to show us. He faced a lot of obstacles, and yet his leadership abilities and the trust in God and God's word took him through to make him a very powerful leader. The book of Acts also gives us a lot of leadership ideas. Also key in on some good leadership books. John Maxwell has real good books, and I'm sure they're going to give you a bibliography with a lot of good books that for leadership. And read them, key in on them. Some of the things you may not be able to fulfill, but you'll grab something good from all of them that will develop your own leadership skills.
Yeah. And so you kind of mentioned it already, but what are a few resources that you would recommend to someone looking to gain insight into becoming a better leader?
Just mainly there's a lot of DVDs out now. There's a lot of webinars. Walking with a leader. Shadow a leader for a while.
Yeah.
It might take you time, but it's also time on their part. Become a mentoree. See who wants to mentor you. You see somebody's ministry flourishing. What is causing that to flourish? What are you doing? And they're going to find out basically that the Word of God and prayer are your paramount.
Yeah.
But then God has just gifted so many other leaders to be able to communicate. And when you read some of those leadership manuals and things, you see how God put them in strategic places and how they went through so much, and yet we can learn from them.
Yeah.
We're going to make mistakes as leaders because people are not the same.
Yeah.
They're all different.
Yeah.
But we can become good leaders and have an impact in the lives of those that God has called us to lead.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap this up, what advice would you give someone that's going into leadership for the first time?
I would have to remind them and make sure that they understand the reality that it's lonely on the top.
Yeah.
You're not always going to make everybody happy, but you do have a call on your life, and you have to stand for integrity. And when things are wrong, you have to tackle them. With God's grace, you can have tact and choice words. And may God help us all to, the hardest things have been some of the most productive things for me. I couldn't sleep at night wondering, how am I going to tell this person this? And yet, with God's help, somehow those words came out smooth enough to where those people rose above that challenge or that mistake or saw the need to be corrected and went on to be powerful and dynamic leaders.
Yeah, that's good.